Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a podcast from PJTN that focuses the light of truth on vital issues in today's headlines that impact every American. I'm your host, Laurie CardozaMoore, founder and president of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, and I'm here to educate, motivate, and activate you to action. I want to arm you with the truth and the facts you'll need to fight and preserve our constitutional republic and uphold the Judeo-Christian values our nation was founded upon. America is on the front lines of a battle for our Judeo-Christian values. Our liberties and the future of our republic hangs in the balance as we watch the complete meltdown of society by a Marxist takeover using disinformation and misinformation, especially in our children's classrooms. If we are going to win the war for our republic, it will require Christians and Jews, people of faith and people of conscience, to take our position on the wall and stand on our watch. We must not allow 1 inch of ground to be taken. It is for such a time as this that we have been raised up. Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a podcast from PJTN that shines the light of biblical truth on vital issues from today's headlines that impact every American, Jew and Christian, people of faith and people of conscience. I'm your host, Laurie CardozaMoore. If you missed the last episode of this podcast, you will find it and our previous podcast lineup on our website at pjtn.org, as well as all our other platforms that you use to access your favorite podcasts. I also want to remind you to listen and share this and all of our previous podcasts with your family and friends so that they can become more informed about this and other related issues. Our goal at PJTN is to equip you to stand against the disinformation by taking back local control of your community and your children's and grandchildren's education. The first step to that process is education. We must become informed. Remember to visit our website daily to receive updates on all of PJTN's groundbreaking initiatives and programs, and sign up to receive PJTN's media and action alerts to share with family and friends. You can also follow us on all the social media platforms at PJTN. As a PJTN Watchman, your action could mean all the difference in the success of our global mission to combat the enemy that is trying to rob our children of their future. So please help me spread this vital information today. In the Bible, we are commanded to teach our children the Word of God as stated in Joel chapter 1, verse 3. Tell your children about it, let your children tell their children, and their children another generation. That's 3 generations who must be taught about God's covenant with Israel and their exodus from Egypt. Unfortunately, we have failed, and we are now witnessing the evidence of that failure in our classrooms today. Our constitutional republic and its next generation of leaders are in jeopardy. There is a war being waged for the future of our nation's children, and the battlefield is America's classroom. Americans have been called to action, and PJTN is on the front lines. Our strategy starts county by county, state by state, to unmask revisionist history curriculum like Common Core and the 1619 Project, to reinstate curriculum containing foundational Judeo-Christian values, combat Marxist ideology and critical race theory in schools, and block antisemitism and Holocaust revisionist history in curriculum. So what can we do to take back local control of our communities? What are some actions that must be taken to reverse the course we are currently on? We are witnessing parents and citizens nationwide who are mobilizing to take back local control of their children's education. It was recently disclosed that the U.S. Secretary of Education, Cardona, asked the National School Board Association to draft a letter to him requesting that they designate parents and citizens who attend school board meetings to hold their local school board officials accountable as domestic terrorists. In response, Attorney General Merrick Garland essentially issued a declaration of war in a memo to weaponize the FBI, including the criminal division of U.S. attorneys in 14,000 school districts across the U.S., addressing supposed threats against school administrators, board members, teachers, and staff, stating that the department will announce a series of measures designed to address the rise of supposed criminal conduct directed towards school personnel. Who is the target of the investigation? Parents and grandparents, moms and dads. It's not Antifa who instigated the January 6th insurrection, murdered people in the streets of our cities, and destroyed public and private property. Nor is it the racist and anti-Semitic Black Lives Matter who launched a modern-day pogrom in Los Angeles. Have law-abiding citizens become the target of our U.S. Attorney General? From Virginia to Washington State and many points in between, Americans reject the indoctrination of our children with racist, anti-Semitic, anti-Judeo-Christian critical race theory and pornographic propaganda in our classrooms, and we will not be intimidated into silence. On this week's podcast, I want to share with you some of the obstacles I am finding in education that is troubling and is a growing problem. But first, I want to talk about the Department of Education on the federal and state levels. It's important that we understand the roles of these governing bodies because this is how we dismantle this takeover of our children's education. First, I want to address the history of the U.S. Department of Education. Throughout the years in the United States of America, there was never a federal Department of Education. The Department of Education came into being under President Jimmy Carter in 1976. Unfortunately, when Ronald Reagan took office in 1980, there was talk that he was going to that he was going to shut down the Department of Education. But unfortunately, he did not. And we are living with the consequences of that choice. The State Department of Education is in charge of the day-to-day operations of the Department of Education at the state level. Their responsibilities are setting policies for school districts, reviewing and approving textbooks and instructional materials, just to name a couple of the operations that they're responsible for. The local school boards, their responsibility is the day-to-day operations of the schools in the districts, and then each school is responsible for its own day-to-day operations. So how do we address these issues? We need to look at the funding, of course, in our local school districts. So we know the structure of the government, and one of the big problems that we have in education is the federal encroachment of education. It's how we got programs like Common Core, Bridges, the Bridges program before it. The federal government, for whatever reason, in Washington, D.C., all the big education lobbyists come up with these great ideas for the federal government. And then, of course, because by law, the federal government is not supposed to interfere with education on the state level. However, if the governor of the state decides he wants to implement policies or if he wants to implement programs that the federal government is recommending, then it's not the federal government encroaching, it's the state, the governor, who is asking for the programs, and it's the governor who adopts them. So I wanted you all to be clear to understand how this process works and why the Federal Department of Education is a problem for us on the local level. So how do we address these issues? And I want to first talk about, where the funding comes from, because the funding, ladies and gentlemen, is key to any operation, especially with regards to education. And education is a multi-billion-dollar industry. That is why there are so many hands in this pie, because there are companies, organizations, even politicians who stand to make millions of dollars based on their involvement with education. So what I would like to know, one of the things that disturbs me is because the federal government dangles these carrots, dangles these programs over the head of the departments of education in all of these states across the country, how do we cut that funding off? I would like to know how much of the money, and this is a question that we should be asking our school board members. When you meet with your school board member, you need to ask them how much of the money, how much of our tax dollars, our local tax dollars come or go toward paying for our education in our districts. We need to know because that's important. We need to keep within a budget. And of course, it's important in order to put together a budget and be able to fund some of the education programs on the local level, we need to know how much money we have. But we first need to know where is that money coming from. But another important thing that we need to know is how much of the money coming into our state Department of Education, how much of that money is coming from the federal government? Because again, like I said, this is how the federal government gets into our classrooms. They come up with programs, they submit their recommendations to the governor, to his commissioner of education, and if they like the program and they like the funds that are attached to it, because what state wants to turn away federal dollars from their budget? There's not too many that I know of. In fact, I don't know of any state that would be willing to cut the federal budget or to cut the federal funding from our schools, from our state departments of education and our local school districts. But so we know that we've got funding coming from the local level, the taxpayers within the district, and then we know we have funding coming in on the federal level. But there's another area where funding comes in for education, and it's called other. So we have an other category, but we don't know what that other category consists of. Who is the other? What is the other? What amount of money is the other giving to us? Well, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to suggest to you that I believe the other includes people like Bill Gates. Now, many of you who are listening from Tennessee, you know that back in 2019, Bill Gates came to Tennessee to meet with Governor Lee. And Bill Gates, of course, brought a $34 million check to Governor Lee. And Governor Lee obviously deposited the check because Bill Gates, in another statement, said that he was going to spend the next 7 years in Tennessee. Well, why is Bill Gates going to be here for another 7 years? Well, let's talk a little bit about the background of Bill Gates, Bill and Melinda Gates. And we know recently they've separated, but in 2006, Bill and Melinda Gates attended the G8 summit in Moscow. And at that summit, this is where Bill Gates presented his concept for Common Core. He didn't call it Common Core, but he did present the concept of Common Core. That was 2006. It was in 2012 that we first became aware of the first textbook that was Common Core compliant with its propaganda published in the textbook. It only took 6 years. Obama was at that conference. So was Bill Gates, and therein was how we got Common Core. And of course, once it was adopted by the federal U.S. Department of Education, of course, Obama and his henchmen, if you will, decided that they were going to go and peddle their wares to the state departments of education across the country. And that's how many of the school districts, in fact, the states, adopted Common Core. Not every state adopted Common Core. There were a couple of states that refused it. And of course, they didn't get the federal dollars that were associated with it. So Bill Gates had the audacity, of course, to come and dictate to parents and citizens what was going to be taught to their children in the classrooms. And in fact, I was in Jerusalem at that time when I read the headlines of the local newspaper, the Tennessean, on May 31st, where it talked about Governor Lee signing a contract with Bill Gates. And I had reached out to Governor Lee through a couple of pastor friends of mine who were also close pastors to the governor, and asked them to give them a letter. I gave them a letter that they presented to the governor requesting that he not sign the contract until I returned from Jerusalem just 5 days later, so that I could lay out why he should not take the money from Bill Gates. But unfortunately, he took the money anyways. And therein lies the problem, ladies and gentlemen, because Common Core has destroyed our education system. It has destroyed our children. These programs usually come about every 10 years. They get repackaged, they get renamed, and then they get resubmitted every 10 years. Because if you think about it, parents and students go through the education system over a 12 to 13-year period. And if parents are going to be involved, they're typically going to be more involved in that K through 6th grade or 8th grade time period. Usually in the high school, parents aren't so much involved with their children's education. It's usually in the earlier years. But unfortunately, this type of curriculum destroys our children because Common Core never taught our kids phonics, so our kids can't read. Phonics was not a supporter of, Common Core was not a supporter of writing in longhand or cursive. No, we were wanting to move our children to technology, that's how they were going to communicate. But that's very dangerous. And I know many of you have heard me say before, and it bears repeating again, that if we do not teach our children to write in longhand, then our children cannot read in longhand. And if our children cannot read in longhand, then they can't read our founding documents. And if our children cannot read our founding documents, they will never know when their freedoms or their rights, their liberties are taken from them. That's why this is so dangerous. But of course, we have now the critical race theory being pushed in through our curriculum. We have equity mathematics. I'm going to be talking more about that in the coming weeks on this podcast because I want all of my listeners to be informed and educated about what we are dealing with so that you will be equipped with the details, with the information, so you can go back and push back at your educators who are peddling this propaganda to our kids. So we need to know, again, going back, we need to know who is the other that is funding our children's education and how much is the other funding that education. Again, it is my belief that it's high time that we as a nation, we as parents, we as citizens cut federal spending in education, that we abolish the federal Department of Education, and that every state government that is taking federal dollars cut the federal funds off. That is the only way we're going to get them out of our classrooms and give us more local control over how we teach our children and what we teach our children. So that's very important for us. It's time that we demand our state legislature cut all this federal and other funding from our classrooms. Our state schools should be funded with our state and local dollars. It should not come from the federal government, and it certainly should not come from people who are others. You also we also have to discuss, as we're, coming to a close on this program, we have to discuss the role that people of faith need to exercise and what our responsibility as people of faith. We are reminded in the Bible that if we miseducate or misinform or teach one of these little innocent children inaccurate information, it says in the Bible that it would be better for a millstone to be wrapped around that person's neck and for that person to be thrown into the depths of the sea. That is how serious this is to the Lord, because we have led millions and millions and millions of children astray over the years, and especially over the last decade. So, ladies and gentlemen, that leads us to discussing how you can get involved, because your involvement is key. I can't be in every county, in every school district, in every classroom, in every state across this country, but I can equip you so that you have the tools to take on your local school district. Remember, 2022 is an election year. This is critically important. Not only will we have congressional and senatorial federal elections, but more importantly, we have school board races too. And I just want to remind you that in Williamson County, when we found one textbook that was anti-American, anti-Judeo-Christian, anti-Semitic, we mobilized our community to the tune of having school board meetings that were packed, standing room only, telling our school board members to get rid of that textbook. And the night that they voted to keep that textbook, I got up and told them that if you've heard from the community, and if you do not vote to remove this textbook, this is an election year, we are going to work to remove you. And ladies and gentlemen, they went ahead and they voted to keep that textbook. And we went ahead the next day and we worked to find 6 parents or citizens to run for school board. And we had 4 months to get them elected. Well, 4 months later, those 6 that were up for re-election, we were able to bring all 6 down. One election. That's the impact of a community that mobilizes to take back local control of their children's education. You can do it as we did it. I want to encourage you to go to our website also to learn more about how to take back local control of your children's education. Ultimately, it starts with you, ladies and gentlemen. You have to educate and inform yourself, and we've got lots of great material. There are award-winning documentary films and television programs there for you to sit and watch. You can sit and watch with your children, with your grandchildren, and have a conversation with them. Teach them. Let them hear a different perspective than what they're hearing in the classroom, because I can assure you the films and the programs that we have produced, your children are not going to be taught this information, and we have to teach it to them. This is a resource for you. It is free. And so please, please, please utilize it. Tell your family and friends about it as well. So ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this program. We will post this podcast on our website and all of our podcast platforms so that you can share this with your family and friends. As PJTN Watchmen, we have a biblical mandate to stand against the rising anti-Semitic incidents taking place globally. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, if we don't teach our children about Israel, we're going to raise up a generation that will not know Israel. They won't stand with Israel like our generation will. And that's why it's so important that we teach our children about the unique relationship that America and Israel share. It's unlike any relationship of any two countries in the world. And it comes right back to the fact that it is because we are both the people of the book. So more and more Christians are falling prey to the anti-Semitic rhetoric on social media platforms, and it's critically important that we inform them. So we cannot remain silent. God even warned the prophet Ezekiel about the responsibility of the watchman. As a watchman, you too have a responsibility to sound the alarm and warn others by simply sharing this podcast with your family and friends. Dietrich Bonhoeffer reminded us that silence in the face of evil is itself evil, that God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. In closing, don't forget to join us for next week's podcast as we continue this conversation about combating the rise of anti-Semitism and taking back local control of your communities and our children's education. I want to also remind you that if you have not signed up to become a PJTN Watchman, you can help support this effort and more programs like this one for just $20 a month. With your generous monthly donation, you can ensure that PJTN is on the front lines and in the headlines, but we can't do it without your faithful prayers and financial support. I hope that you will prayerfully consider supporting our mission as we educate to activate Jews, Christians, and all people of conscience to stand on the front lines of this all-encompassing war. I want to leave you with a word of encouragement in Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6. Train the youth according to his way. Even when he grows old, he will not swerve from it. God bless you, and thank you for all you do on behalf of our Jewish brethren, the State of Israel, and these United States. Thank you again for joining me on this edition of Proclaiming Justice. Please share this podcast with your family and friends. For more information about how you can get involved, please visit our website at pjtn.org. As a PJTN Watchman, you can help us keep up the fight to preserve our freedom for our children and their children for such a time as this.